Willa found the letter in Silas Thorn's kitchen drawer 1 week after telling him she wanted him. 2 pages addressed to a Denver land broker, agreeing to sell the ranch and leave Millhaven, every acre. The house, the barn, the creek, it was unsigned, but he had kept it. When Silas came in from the barn, she was waiting at the table with both hands flat against the wood. "Were you going to tell me?" He saw the letter and stopped. "I never sent it." Willa held his gaze. "But you never destroyed it." The stove fire still glowed behind him. Her voice stayed steady. "If you meant what you said at the creek, burn it. Right now. In front of me." He said it on a Tuesday afternoon in late summer, leaning against a fence post by the creek, watching her wring out a shirt with the kind of easy competence that made everything look simple. He had not planned it. He had not rehearsed it. It came out the way true things sometimes do, before better judgment could stop them. "You know, Willa, whoever ends up marrying you is going to be a very lucky man." He expected a laugh, a modest deflection, the kind of response that lets everyone move on without anyone having to be brave. Instead, she went still. Her hands stayed on the shirt. The color came into her face slowly, like a lamp being turned up. She did not look at him immediately. Then she did, and her expression was something he had never seen on her before, open and afraid and decided all at once, and what she said back would crack open everything he thought he knew about his own life. But to understand why those words mattered, to understand what they cost her and what they gave him, you have to go back to March, to the night Silas Thorn almost left Millhaven forever. Colorado, 1882. The town of Millhaven sat on the western slope where the plateau broke into foothills, a small place held together by cattle, wheat, and the kind of stubbornness that keeps people rooted in hard country. It was beautiful in the way that demanded something from you. It did not give easily, and it did not forgive carelessness, and the people who stayed there understood that bargain in their bones. Silas Thorn was 30 years old. He ran a modest cattle ranch on the western edge of town, 160 acres his father Abel had claimed and built from raw dirt. Abel Thorn died when Silas was 19, thrown from a horse during a November storm, leaving behind a half-finished barn, a grieving wife, and debts that would have broken a lesser man. Silas did not break. He buried his father on a Thursday and was back mending fence on Friday because the cattle did not care about grief and the bank did not care about funerals. His mother Frances lasted 5 more years. She was a quiet woman who showed love through action rather than words. The kind of mother who would stay up until midnight mending a coat and never mention it in the morning. The winter of 1876 took her, pneumonia. Silas sat beside her bed for 3 days, and on the third night she held his hand and told him the only thing she had ever asked him to remember. "Build something worth coming home to, Silas. That is the whole point of all of this." He had spent the decades since doing exactly that, paying off every dollar his father owed, replacing every rotted post, rebuilding the barn his father never finished. He did it alone, season by season, winter by winter, with nothing but his own 2 hands and a kind of endurance that looked from the outside like strength but was really something closer to numbness. Because somewhere along the way, Silas Thorn had taught himself to stop wanting things. Not consciously, not dramatically. He simply stopped reaching for anything beyond the immediate work in front of him. If you do not want, you cannot lose, and he had lost enough to know what losing cost. He was not a complicated man. He worked hard, kept his word, paid his debts, and went to bed tired every night with the satisfaction of someone who has done what needed doing. The ranch was solvent, the cattle were healthy, the fences held. By every practical measure, he had succeeded. What he did not have, what he had quietly stopped expecting, was someone to come home to. Roscoe Dunlap noticed this before Silas did, because Roscoe Dunlap noticed most things. He was 57, gray-haired, built like a fence post himself, and he had worked the Thorn Ranch since Abel was alive. He was the kind of man who could shoe a horse, predict weather by the color of the sky, and tell you exactly what you did not want to hear with a directness that left no room for argument. On a cold morning in March, they were repairing the cattle shed together, breath coming in clouds, hands stiff from the chill. Roscoe paused with a nail between his teeth and looked around the ranch, the wide pasture, the solid barn, the house with its single lit window. "Your daddy built this ranch to have something to come home to," Roscoe said. "You turned it into something to hide inside." Silas did not answer. He drove a nail into the board and reached for the next one. But his hand stayed on the nail head a moment longer than it needed to, and Roscoe saw that too, because Roscoe saw everything. That same month, on a night when the wind came down from the mountains hard enough to rattle the windows, Silas sat at his kitchen table with a letter spread in front of him. It was from a land broker in Denver, a man named Pruitt, who had written twice before. The letter was straightforward. The ranch was debt-free, the land was valuable, and the market was favorable. Pruitt had a buyer in California, willing to pay enough for Silas to start over somewhere warm, somewhere without the memory of his parents in every floorboard and fence post. Silas had written a reply, 2 pages, careful handwriting, agreeing to the terms. The letter sat on the table, sealed, addressed, waiting for morning. He sat there a long time. The fire burned low. The wind kept at the windows. He thought about California, about warmth, about the particular relief of walking away from a place that held nothing but work and silence. In the morning, he woke before dawn, as he always did. He looked at the letter on the table. He looked out the window toward the east, where the first light was touching the hills above the Ashford property with the kind of gold that only happens in early spring. He did not send the letter, not because he decided to stay, only because he had not quite decided to leave. He put it in the kitchen drawer, unsealed it, left it unsigned. It sat there through April, through May, through June. 4 months, not sent, not destroyed. Because Silas Thorn was not a man who burned bridges. He just left them standing and tried not to look back. The Ashford family lived on the property east of his, across a shallow creek lined with cottonwood trees. Orrin Ashford was 58, a large, quiet man with a gray beard and eyes that saw things clearly without commenting on them immediately. He had the kind of authority that came not from volume but from consistency, the kind of man whose word was enough because he never gave it carelessly. His wife Nell was warm and practical, the sort of woman who could feed 12 people on short notice and make every one of them feel expected. Their daughter Willa was 30 years old. She had sunlightened blonde hair that she kept loosely pinned, and there were always a few strands escaping at the neck. She was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with effort. No jewelry, no powder, no arrangement. Just clear skin tanned lightly from outdoor work, and eyes that paid attention, and the kind of face that looked exactly like what it was. She woke before sunrise every morning. She kept the house. She tended the garden. She helped with the washing. She cooked 3 meals a day, and she still found time to bring soup to old Mr. Gentry down the road when his back went out again. She did all of this without complaint and without fanfare, the way some people breathe, naturally, without thinking about it. The Ashfords were good people, the kind who showed up when someone needed a hand and never mentioned it afterward. Silas had known Willa for years. He had spoken to her dozens of times. He had eaten at her family's table. He had watched her work and thought vaguely that Orrin Ashford had raised a fine daughter. He had not, until that particular spring, understood what he was actually looking at. What most people in Millhaven did not know, because Willa did not speak of it, was that 5 years earlier, a man named Langley had courted her through an entire summer. He was charming and certain and full of plans. He talked about building a house, about the future, about all the things they would do together. Then the Montana gold strikes came, and Langley left without a word. No letter, no explanation, just an empty seat at the Sunday table and a silence where promises used to be. Willa did not fall apart. She was not the falling apart kind. But something shifted in her after that, something quiet and permanent. She stopped trusting words. She watched what people did instead of what they said. She carried this not as bitterness, but as clarity, the hard-won clarity of a woman who has learned exactly what promises are worth when they are not backed by action. The fence between the Thorn and Ashford properties ran along the creek for nearly a quarter-mile. Spring floods took out sections every year, predictable as taxes, and every year they had to be rebuilt. In May, after the water dropped, Silas was out repairing a damaged section when Willa came down to wash clothes at the creek. She did not see him at first. She set her basket at the water's edge and began working with the easy efficiency of someone who had done this 1,000 times. Sleeves rolled to the elbow, hair pinned loosely, humming something low and barely audible over the water. She was not performing. She was just there, fully present in the work, the way competent people are when they are doing something their hands know by memory. Silas kept working on the fence post. He was not watching her, except that he was. Not in any way that would have embarrassed either of them. Just the way your eyes go to movement, to life, when the landscape around you is still. After a while, she noticed him. "Morning, Silas." "Morning, Willa." He nodded at the fence. "Spring floods. They always get that section," she said. "Papa has been meaning to raise our posts too. They talked for a few minutes about nothing particular. The weather, the cattle, whether Gentry's back was improving. Then she went back to her washing, and he went back to his fence, and the creek moved between them, and the cottonwoods made their soft sound in the wind. And Silas Thorn drove a post into the ground and thought, for the first time in a very long time, that he was not entirely alone. He did not know what to do with that thought, so he did what he always did. He kept working. 2 weeks later, a late spring storm pulled half the roof off the Ashford cattle shed. Orrin had been putting off repairs since winter, and now the damage was beyond what one man could fix in a day. Silas heard about it from Roscoe, who heard everything worth hearing in Millhaven before breakfast, and he rode over the next morning without being asked. He found Orrin already on the roof, pulling damaged shingles with the slow, careful movements of a man whose shoulders had been complaining for years. Silas climbed up without a word and started working the other end. They did not talk much. Two men on a roof in the wind do not need to discuss what needs doing. They just do it. Around midday, Willa came out with water and cold biscuits wrapped in cloth. She handed the jug up to her father first, then held one out to Silas. He climbed down to take it, and their hands touched briefly on the handle. Neither of them reacted, but neither of them looked away quite fast enough either. "Thank you for coming," she said. "Papa would not have asked." "I know," Silas said. "That is why I came." She studied him for a moment with an expression he could not read, then went back inside. Orrin, still on the roof, watched the whole exchange without comment, but when Silas climbed back up, the older man handed him the better hammer. It was a small thing. It was also not a small thing at all. They finished the roof by late afternoon. Orrin shook his hand at the gate and said only, "Good work." 2 words from Orrin Ashford meant more than a speech from most men. Silas rode home knowing something had shifted between him and the Ashford family. Some invisible line had been crossed from neighbor into something closer, though he did not have a name for it yet. The town of Millhaven held a summer social on the last Saturday of June. It was the kind of event that mattered enormously in small communities. A chance to see everyone, dance to old Nesbitt's fiddle, eat enough food to feed twice the county, and conduct the social business that the rest of the year was too busy for. Silas arrived late and found the Ashford family already there, Orrin in his good jacket, Nell with her hair properly done, and Willa in a pale blue dress that was simple and clean and somehow exactly right. She was helping set up the dessert table, talking and laughing with the other women, completely at ease. 3 men asked her to dance before the music had been playing 20 minutes. Silas watched this from across the room with an expression he would have described as neutral. Delia Satterfield found him before he finished his first drink. She was 28, the daughter of the general store owner, and she was pretty in the way that announces itself. Hair curled carefully, smile wide and warm, a laugh that carried across the room. She touched Silas's arm when she talked, leaned in close, asked questions that were more invitation than inquiry. "Have you ever thought about leaving Millhaven, Silas? There is so much more out there. A man like you could do well in Denver." Silas danced with her because it would have been rude not to. She was a fine dancer and pleasant company. But across the room, over Delia's shoulder, he could see Willa at the dessert table. Willa glanced toward them once, and her expression did not change, but she turned away slightly faster than she needed to, and her hands arranged the plates with a precision that looked less like care and more like keeping busy. Later, Silas danced with the widow Stanhope, who was 71 and sharp as a new blade. She was a good dancer and a sensible woman, and she told him directly, without preamble, that he had been staring at Willa Ashford all evening. "I have not been staring," he said. "Silas." She looked at him with the particular patience of someone who has lived long enough to be tired of nonsense. "I have known you since you were 11 years old. You have been staring." He changed the subject. She let him, which was its own kind of judgment. But later, walking home alone under the stars, he stopped in the middle of the road. The music was still faintly audible behind him. The sky was enormous, the way it only is in Colorado, so full of stars it seemed excessive. Willa Ashford, his neighbor, kind and capable and beautiful in a way she did not seem to know about. He stopped walking. She was someone he wanted to see every day. He had not known that until this exact moment, but now that he knew it, it seemed obvious. The kind of thing that had been true for a long time before he had the sense to look at it directly. He stood on the road in the dark, listening to the crickets, feeling like a man who has just found something he did not know he had lost. And the worst part was, he was not sure he deserved to keep it. Something had shifted. quietly, in the particular direction of Willa Ashford. And Silas Thorn, who had spent a decade building walls against exactly this kind of feeling, stood in the dark and felt them crack. The news came into Millhaven the way most news did, slowly and then all at once. A wealthy businessman from Denver named Garrett Pinley was buying land in the county. Not farming it, not ranching it, buying it the way men in suits buy things, as positions on a ledger rather than dirt you work with your hands. Roscoe heard it first and told Silas over morning coffee with the particular tone he reserved for things he did not trust. Men like that do not buy land, Roscoe said. They buy people's patience until it runs out. Pinley arrived in Millhaven in early July. He was 45, well-dressed in a way that looked expensive without being showy, and he spoke with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to getting what he wanted. He came to the Thorn Ranch first, knocked on the door, introduced himself, complimented the property with genuine knowledge, and made an offer that was 15% above market value. Silas listened politely and declined. Pinley smiled. It was the particular smile of a man who has already decided the answer will eventually be yes. He shook Silas's hand, said he understood, said the offer would remain open, and turned to leave. At the gate he paused and looked back across the property, the wide pasture, the solid barn, the house standing alone against the hills. Beautiful land, Pinley said. Shame for one man to have all this space and no one to share it with. The words were casual. The observation was not. It landed exactly where Silas kept the thing he did not talk about, and Pinley saw that it landed, and his smile changed just slightly. After Pinley's horse disappeared down the road, Silas stood on his porch for a long time. He thought about the unsigned letter still sitting in his kitchen drawer. He thought about the broker in Denver whose name was on that letter. He thought about Pinley's smile, the smile of a man who waits. And somewhere across the creek in the direction of the Ashford property, he could hear Willa Ashford's voice carrying faintly on the summer air, calling to someone, or maybe singing. The distance made it hard to tell. Silas went inside. He opened the kitchen drawer. He looked at the letter. He did not pick it up. He closed the drawer and went back to work, because work was the only language he had ever been fluent in, and because the alternative was standing still long enough to feel the full weight of everything he had spent 10 years avoiding. But the drawer did not lock, and the letter did not disappear, and Garrett Pinley did not leave Millhaven. Old Mr. Gentry's back got worse in August. The man was 72 and built from rawhide and opinions, and he lived alone in a cabin half a mile south of the Ashford property, with no family left and no patience for sympathy. Willa went to his place every other day with food and firewood and whatever else needed doing, because that was what Willa did. She took care of people without being asked and without keeping score. Silas found this out when he saw her walking past on the road one morning, basket in hand, moving with the purposeful stride of someone on an errand that mattered. He was on the barn roof replacing shingles that the spring storms had torn loose. He did not think about it. He climbed down, brushed the sawdust off his shirt, and caught up to her at the fence line. "You do not have to," she said. "I know," he said. "I want to." She looked at him with a slightly surprised expression that she smoothed over quickly, and they walked the half-mile together in the warm morning sun. Silas discovered something he should have known already. Willa Ashford was extraordinarily good company. She had opinions, quiet and considered, offered without forcing them on anyone. She noticed things most people walked past without seeing. The soft bank developing at the second creek crossing where the current was undercutting the roots of a big cottonwood. The Caldwell corn coming in short this year, which meant the county would feel it at harvest. She delivered these observations the way she delivered everything, plainly, without decoration, trusting you to understand why they mattered. She was funny too, not the loud kind, the dry, unhurried kind that crept up on you and landed before you realized it was coming. They sat with old Gentry for an hour while Willa heated the soup and checked his woodpile. Gentry was a man of strong convictions and no social graces whatsoever, and he looked at Silas across the small kitchen table with the blunt appraisal of someone who has lived too long to bother with politeness. "You are a fool," Gentry said, "if you do not see what is right in front of you." Willa, standing at the stove with her back to them, went very still. Then she found something urgent to do with the firewood that required her to be in the other room immediately. Silas looked at the old man. "I am working on it," he said quietly. Gentry made a sound that might have been approval or might have been disgust at the pace of it. With Gentry, it was hard to tell. On the walk back, neither of them mentioned what Gentry had said, But the silence between them was warm and full rather than empty, and when they reached the fork where the path split toward their separate properties, Willa turned to him with a small, genuine smile. "Thank you for the company," she said. "It is nicer with someone to walk with." He watched her go toward the Ashford house and thought, yes, it is. But what Silas did not know, because he was paying attention to Willa and not to the road behind them, was that Garrett Pinley had been at the Ashford property that same morning, and he had not come to talk about land. Pinley's visits to the Ashford house became regular through the first weeks of August. He brought gifts with the careful precision of a man who understood that generosity is a form of leverage when applied correctly. Imported fabric from Denver for Nell, a set of books for Willa, novels she had mentioned wanting to read during a conversation Silas had not been present for. He sat on the Ashford porch with Orrin and talked about cattle futures and eastern markets and the railroad expansion that would change property values across the western slope. He was polite. He was informed. He was generous in ways that cost him nothing relative to what he had and meant everything relative to what the Ashfords did not. Silas saw it for the first time on a Thursday afternoon. He was riding back from the north pasture when he passed the Ashford gate and saw Pinley's horse tied to the post and Pinley himself sitting in the good chair on the porch, hat off, legs crossed, talking to Orrin with the comfortable ease of a man who has been invited and knows he is welcome. Willa stood in the doorway. Her expression was neutral, polite but not warm, present but not engaged. She was holding a glass of water she had not offered to refill. Silas rode past without stopping. But he felt something tighten in his chest that he did not have a name for, or rather, he did have a name for it but was not ready to use it. The next time Silas came to supper at the Ashford table, Orrin asked a question that sounded ordinary but was not. He set down his fork and looked at Silas with those steady appraisals and said, "You ever think about what that ranch of yours will look like in 10 years, Silas?" Silas understood what was being asked. Orrin Ashford was a practical man. He loved his daughter, but he had also survived 2 hard winters in a row that had thinned his herd and strained his reserves. He was looking at Silas and seeing a man alone on a good piece of land with no clear plan beyond the next season. And he was looking at Pinley and seeing stability, resources, certainty. Orrin was not choosing against Silas. He was waiting for Silas to give him a reason to choose for him, and so far, the man who had been ready to sell his ranch and leave had not given one. In the middle of August, the Caldwells hosted a gathering to celebrate the early hay cutting. Most of Millhaven came. There was food and music and the particular looseness that comes from a community letting down its guard for an evening. Delia Satterfield was there. She found Silas at the edge of the crowd where he stood with Holt McGuire, his closest friend, a practical man of 32 who worked a small spread north of town and who had the useful talent of hearing everything worth hearing in Millhaven without appearing to listen. Delia had been drinking, not enough to be unsteady, but enough to be bold. She talked to Silas with the bright, focused energy of someone who has decided that tonight is the night for something. And when Holt stepped away to refill his cup, she leaned in and kissed Silas on the mouth. It was fast, it was public, and it happened before Silas could react. He stepped back immediately, his hand coming up between them, surprise and something close to anger crossing his face at the same time. But the damage was done. Willa Ashford was standing 10 steps away, a glass of water in her hand, and she had seen everything. The kiss. The moment before the kiss when Delia leaned in and Silas did not lean away fast enough. The geometry of 2 people standing too close in firelight. Willa did not shout. She did not cry. She did not make a scene. She set her glass down on the nearest table with a small, precise click, told Nell she was tired, and walked home. That was all. No performance. No confrontation. Just a woman removing herself from a situation with the quiet efficiency of someone who has practiced this particular withdrawal before. It was the kind of response that is worse than anger, because anger means someone still believes the situation can be fixed. What Willa did was the response of a woman who had already been disappointed by a man once and had decided permanently that she would never stand still long enough to be disappointed again. Silas went after her. He got as far as the Ashford gate before Orrin appeared on the porch, large and solid in the dim light. "Not tonight, son. Give her some air." Orrin was not angry. His voice was not raised, but the message was clear. My daughter is not a woman who will sit around waiting for a man to figure out who he wants. And right now, you have not figured that out. Silas stood at that gate for a long time after Orrin went inside. The music from the Caldwell place drifted faintly across the fields. The stars were out, and Silas Thorn understood something clearly for the first time. It is possible to lose someone you never had. The days that followed were the worst Silas had experienced since the winter his mother died. Not because anything dramatic happened, but because nothing happened at all. Willa did not come to the creek on Tuesday. When he saw her on the road heading to Gentry's place, she smiled and said good morning with perfect politeness and kept walking without slowing down. The warmth that had been building between them, the easy silences, the private jokes, the way she looked at him when she thought he was not looking, all of it was gone, replaced by courtesy. And courtesy from Willa Ashford was the coldest thing Silas had ever felt. During those same days, Willa discovered what Pinley had really been offering her father. She found Orrin at the kitchen table one evening with Pinley's written proposal spread before him, a partnership. Pinley would buy 3 neighboring ranches, consolidate them into a single large cattle operation, and install Orrin as managing foreman. In exchange, Pinley would cover the Ashford debts from the previous 2 winters and guarantee the family's financial future. Willa read the document standing over her father's shoulder. Then she sat down across from him and spoke in a voice that was quiet and absolutely steady. "He is buying you, Papa, not hiring you." Orrin looked up. "He is offering stability, Willa. Something this family has not had in 2 winters. And what exactly does he want in return?" The silence that followed was the kind that answers a question more honestly than words ever could. They both knew Pinley's interest in the Ashford family extended beyond Orrin's skills with cattle. A man does not bring books to a foreman's daughter. "I will not be part of a business arrangement," Willa said. Not again, not ever. It was the first time she had mentioned Langley directly in years. Orrin looked at his daughter and saw something he had not fully understood before. She was not just angry, she was afraid. Afraid of being traded, afraid of being a line item in someone else's calculations, afraid of the specific kind of loneliness that comes from being chosen for practical reasons by a man who does not actually see you. Orrin set down the proposal. He did not tear it up, but he did not pick it up again either. Roscoe Dunlap found Silas the next morning splitting firewood behind the barn with considerably more force than the task required. Roscoe leaned against the fence and watched for a while with the patience of a man who knows that sometimes you have let someone exhaust themselves before they can hear anything. When Silas finally stopped, breathing hard, the axe buried in the chopping block, Roscoe spoke. "The Satterfield girl did not take anything from you," Roscoe said. "She just showed Willa what Willa was afraid of, that you have not decided yet. And a woman like Willa Ashford will not wait for a man to decide. She already decided years ago. She has been waiting for you to catch up." Silas pulled the axe from the block. "How do you know that?" "Because I have got eyes, son. That is the only advantage old age gives you. You lose your back, your knees, and your patience, but you see clearer." Silas stood there with the axe in his hands and the sweat cooling on his back and knew that Roscoe was right. He had been treating this like something that might happen to him, like weather, like luck, like something he could wait out or avoid. But Willa Ashford was not weather. She was a woman who had already made her choice and was watching him fail to make his. He put down the axe. He did not pick it up again that day. Holt McGuire came by that afternoon. He leaned against the barn door and delivered the news the way he delivered everything, plainly and without padding. "Delia Satterfield has been telling people in town that you and her are courting. Half the county heard it by Tuesday. Willa Ashford heard it by Wednesday." Silas looked at him. "That is not true." "I know it is not true," Holt said. "You know it is not true. But Delia is the one talking, and you are the one not saying anything." "Silence looks like agreement from the outside, Silas. If you do not correct this, everyone in Millhaven will assume it is settled." Silas rode into town the next morning. He found Delia at her father's store arranging bolts of fabric on the front table. She saw him coming and smiled the way she always did, bright and certain, as if the kiss at the gathering had been the beginning of something rather than a mistake. He did not raise his voice. He did not embarrass her in front of customers. He simply stood at the counter and said what needed to be said. "I am not courting you, Delia. I need you to stop telling people that I am." The smile faded. Something harder appeared beneath it. "A woman does not kiss a man in front of the whole county unless she has reason to believe it will be welcome," she said. "You did not have that reason," Silas said, "and I am sorry if anything I did made you think otherwise. But this needs to stop." Delia looked at him for a long moment. Her jaw tightened. Then she turned back to the fabric and said very quietly, "It is the Ashford girl, is it not?" Silas did not answer. He did not need to. He put his hat back on and walked out. Behind him, he heard the sharp sound of a bolt of fabric being dropped on the counter harder than it needed to be. But by the end of the week, the talk in Millhaven had changed. And that was what mattered. Instead of waiting for things to repair themselves, Silas spent the next 3 mornings doing something that no one asked him to do. He remembered what Willa had pointed out on their walk to Gentry's, the soft bank at the second creek crossing where the current was undercutting the land on the Ashford side. If it was not reinforced before the autumn rains, the erosion would take out fence posts and flood the southern cattle pen. He hauled stone from the north end of his own property, loaded it into the wagon before dawn, and spent 3 days building a proper revetment along the Ashford Creek bank. He dug footings, he stacked rock, he drove new posts where the old ones had gone soft. He did it in the early morning hours before anyone in the Ashford house was awake, and he did not tell anyone he was doing it. Orrin Ashford discovered it on the 4th morning when he walked the property line to check his fences after a night of rain. He stood at the creek bank and looked at the new stonework and the fresh posts and the careful grading that would channel water away from his cattle pen, and he understood exactly what he was looking at. Not charity, not a favor. A man answering a question with his hands because he did not yet have the words. That evening, when Silas came to the Ashford door for the first time in over a week, Orrin opened it and said only, "The creek bank is fixed." Silas nodded. Orrin stepped aside to let him in without another word, but the way he stepped aside said everything that needed saying. Willa was in the kitchen. She looked up when he entered, and for the first time since the Caldwell gathering, her expression was not polite courtesy. It was something closer to curiosity. The look of a woman reassessing a situation she thought she had already figured out. She did not mention the creek bank. She did not need to. Willa Ashford did not trust words. She trusted hands, and Silas's hands had just told her something his mouth had not yet managed to say. Holt McGuire brought up the news about Pinley 2 days later. He had heard it at the saloon from a teamster passing through from Pueblo County. Pinley had done this before. 3 ranches south of Pueblo, same pattern. Generous offers, patient waiting, and then when the owners hit hard times and needed to sell quickly, Pinley dropped his price to half. 2 of the 3 families lost everything. The third was still fighting him in court. Silas rode to town and sent a letter to the county clerk in Pueblo. The reply came back in 10 days and confirmed every detail. Garrett Pinley was not a developer. He was not building anything. He was a land speculator who waited for people to weaken and then took what they were too exhausted to defend. It was a Tuesday. Silas had begun to think Tuesdays meant something. He was checking the fence posts he had repaired months ago, the same section that the spring floods damaged every year, when he heard her at the creek. Willa had come down with a larger load than usual, and she was singing. Not performing for anyone, just singing low and easy to herself, without awareness that anyone could hear. He stood there listening. The sky was wide and blue above the valley. The water moved over the rocks with its constant sound, and Willa Ashford did ordinary things with a grace she did not seem to know she had. She noticed him and raised a hand. He walked to the fence. They talked the weather, the cattle, whether Gentry was improving. Then a pause settled between them, the kind that does not need filling, the kind that only exists between people who are comfortable enough to be quiet together. She was wringing out a shirt, her arms strong, her movements precise. And Silas was thinking about Gentry and Stanhope and Roscoe and the weeks of distance and the cold courtesy and the creek bank and the stone he had carried in the dark. And he was thinking about the unsigned letter still in his kitchen drawer, and the fact that he had not destroyed it, and what that said about him, and whether he was the kind of man who deserved what he was about to ask for. And then, without planning it, without rehearsing it, the way true things come out before caution can catch them, he said it. "You know, Willa, whoever ends up marrying you is going to be a very lucky man." She stopped. Her hand stayed on the wet cloth. Color rose in her face slowly, not dramatically, just a deepening. She did not look at him immediately. Then she did. And her expression was the thing he had never seen before, the thing from the flash of that first moment before this whole story began. Open and afraid, and decided all at once. "I was hoping it would be you," she said, very quietly. The creek kept moving, the sky held still, neither of them breathed for what felt like a long time. "I have been thinking about you since the social," he said. "The social," she said. "Before that, probably. I just did not know it yet." She set the shirt carefully in the basket. I have been thinking about you for considerably longer than June, she said. There was a dry note in her voice, that humor of hers showing up even here, even now. You were somewhat slower than I was. He laughed. He had not expected to laugh. I am sorry. Do not apologize, she said. You got there. They stood on opposite sides of the fence in the summer sun, and Silas felt something he recognized after a moment as gratitude. Not for the moment itself, but for the fact that he had not left in March, that the letter had stayed in the drawer, that he had been given the chance to stand here at all. Would you let me come call on you properly? He said. I would like to speak with your father. She looked at him for a long moment, and something in her face softened in a way he had never seen. He likes you, she said simply. He has been hoping you would get around to it. She picked up her basket and walked toward the Ashford house. Silas stood at the fence for a long time after she was gone, feeling like a man who had narrowly avoided the worst mistake of his life. The afternoon sun was warm on his back. The fence was solid under his hand. And somewhere in his kitchen drawer, an unsigned letter sat in the dark, waiting for a decision that had just been made for it, even if Silas did not know it yet. Because Willa Ashford had just done something that required more courage than anything Silas Thorn had ever done at that fence. She had answered honestly when she could have protected herself. She had said the true thing when the safe thing was silence. And now both of them were standing on the other side of that truth, and there was no going back. What Silas did not know, what he would not discover for another week, was that Willa would find the letter, and that what happened next would test whether his hands and his words were finally telling the same story. Willa found the letter on a Wednesday. She had come to the ranch house with Nell to measure the windows for curtains, a project Nell had invented for reasons Willa suspected but did not question. Nell was in the main room holding a length of string against a window frame and talking about fabric weight and light filtration with the focused authority of a woman who has opinions about domestic matters and sees no reason to keep them quiet. Willa was in the kitchen looking for something to mark measurements with. She opened the drawer beside the stove, the one where most people keep string and nails and the small, forgotten tools of daily life. What she found instead was a letter. 2 pages, careful handwriting, addressed to a land broker in Denver named Pruitt. She recognized Silas's hand immediately because he wrote the way he spoke, plain and direct, without decoration. The letter agreed to sell the ranch, every acre, the house, the barn, the pasture, the creek frontage, all of it, for a price that was fair and final. It was not signed, but it was not destroyed either. Willa read it once, slowly. Then she folded it and placed it back exactly where she had found it. She closed the drawer. She finished helping Nell with the measurements. She said the right things and smiled at the right moments and gave no indication that anything had changed. When Silas came in from the barn 20 minutes later, she was standing at the kitchen table with her hands flat on the wood, very still. Nell had gone to look at the garden. The house was quiet. Were you going to tell me? Willa said. It was not a question. It was the kind of sentence that has already decided its own answer. Tell you what? That you were going to sell this ranch and leave. The silence that followed filled the kitchen the way cold fills an empty room. Silas looked at her and saw that she had found the letter, and he saw what finding it had cost her, and he understood that he was standing at the exact edge of something that could not be walked back from. I did not send it, he said, but you did not destroy it either. She was looking at him with an expression that was not anger. It was something more precise than anger and considerably more dangerous. It was the expression of a woman who had heard promises before from a man who left, who had rebuilt herself carefully from that wreckage, who had allowed herself to believe again at a fence by a creek, and who was now discovering that the man she believed in had kept an escape route in his kitchen drawer the entire time. I wrote that letter in March, Silas said, because I did not have a reason to stay. I did not send it because I was not sure, and I did not throw it away because I am a man who keeps his options open, which is a cowardly way to live, and I know that now. Willa watched him without speaking. Her hands were still flat on the table. Steady, burn it, she said. He looked at her. If you meant what you said at the creek, then burn it right now, in front of me, because I will not be someone's option, Silas. I have been that before. I stood in this kind of silence before and watched a man choose somewhere else over me, and I will not do it again. Not for you, not for anyone. The fire in the stove was low but still alive. Silas walked to the drawer. He took out the letter. He did not read it again. He did not hesitate. He crossed the kitchen and opened the stove door and put the letter on the coals and watched the paper catch and curl and blacken and disappear. Willa watched every second of it. She did not move until the last corner of paper had gone to ash. Then she let out a breath that she seemed to have been holding since Wednesday, or maybe since a summer 5 years ago when a man named Langley rode north without looking back. Good, she said quietly. She straightened. She picked up the measuring string from the table. She walked toward the door, and Silas thought for one terrible moment that she was leaving. For real, that the burning had not been enough. But at the doorway she stopped. She did not turn fully around. She spoke over her shoulder in a voice that was steady and soft and carried something in it that sounded like the first stage of forgiveness. Supper is at 6. Mama is making the pie you like. Then she was gone across the yard, and Silas stood alone in the kitchen with the smell of burned paper and the understanding that Willa Ashford had just asked him for the only thing she had ever needed from anyone. Not words, not promises, just proof. He went to find Pinley that afternoon. The man was renting a room above the general store in town, and Silas found him on the porch reading a newspaper with the unhurried posture of someone who considers waiting a professional skill. Pinley looked up with that smile. The patient one. The one that said every man has a price, and I have time. My ranch is not for sale, Silas said. It was not in March, and it is not now. Pinley folded the newspaper. Everything is for sale, Mr. Thorn. It is just a question of winter. I have survived 11 winters on that land. I will survive the 12th. Pinley studied him for a moment, then changed approach the way a man changes tools when the first one does not fit. The Ashford girl, Pinley said. She is a practical woman. She deserves stability. Not a man who nearly ran. The words landed precisely where they were aimed. Pinley knew about the letter. Whether through the Denver broker or through the small invisible network of information that money buys in small towns, he knew. And he was using it the way he used everything, as leverage. She deserves a man who stays, Silas said. I burned the letter. You should know that. He did not wait for a response. He walked down the porch steps and untied his horse and rode home without looking back. Behind him, for the first time since he had arrived in Millhaven, Garrett Pinley was not smiling. 2 weeks later, the news from Pueblo County reached Millhaven through official channels. A teamster brought court documents confirming that Pinley had sued 3 families into foreclosure after manipulating their debt terms. The details were specific and ugly. Families who had farmed their land for decades, bankrupted by a man who never intended to build anything on the ground he took from them. The news moved through Millhaven the way fire moves through dry grass. By the end of the week, every rancher in the county knew what Pinley was, and not one of them would sell to him. Orrin Ashford came to the Thorn Ranch on a Saturday morning. He stood at the fence and waited until Silas came out, and the 2 men faced each other across the same property line that their families had shared for years. You knew about him, Orrin said. Holt heard it first, Silas said. I checked. Why did you not tell me directly? Because you are not a man who likes being told what to do. You needed to see it yourself. Orrin looked at Silas for a long time with an expression that Silas had never seen from him before. It was not gratitude exactly. It was recognition. The look of one man acknowledging that another man understands him well enough to know the difference between helping and interfering. Orrin nodded once. It was the kind of nod that settled things. That evening, Orrin went home and told Willa about the conversation. He sat in his chair by the fireplace and recounted it plainly without embellishment, because Orrin Ashford did not embellish. He told her that Silas had known about Pinley's history in Pueblo County, that Silas had sent for the court records himself, and that when Orrin asked why he had not said anything directly, Silas had said it was because Orrin needed to see it for himself. Willa listened from the kitchen doorway. She did not speak until her father finished. Then she said, he knew, and he waited. He waited, Orrin confirmed. Willa was quiet for a long time. She understood something about Silas in that moment that went deeper than anything he had told her at the creek or shown her with the stonework at the bank. This was not a man who acted to impress. This was a man who understood that respect sometimes looks like restraint. That protecting someone does not always mean stepping in front of them. Sometimes it means stepping aside and letting them see the truth with their own eyes. She dried her hands on the towel and hung it on the hook by the stove. She did not say anything else about it, but when she set the table for supper that night, she set it for 5 instead of 4. And when Nell asked who the extra plate was for, Willa said simply, Silas will be here at 6. Pinley left Millhaven at the end of September. He packed his bags and rode south without ceremony. No one saw him off. No one cared to. He was simply gone, the way men like him are always eventually gone, because communities built on trust have a way of identifying and expelling the things that threaten them, quietly, without drama. That same evening, Silas put on his good shirt. He combed his hair. He walked to the Ashford house, feeling more nervous than he had felt since he was 16 and had to tell his father about losing 2 cattle in a November storm. Orrin was on the porch when he arrived. The older man gestured to the empty chair beside him, and they sat together watching the last of the sunset paint the western hills in shades that had no names in English. "I would like to come calling on Willa," Silas said, "with your permission." Orrin was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "What took you so long?" And he said it gently, with a small smile. "I am asking sincerely. Nell and I have been watching you figure this out for 2 years. We were beginning to wonder if we needed to say something directly." Silas let that sit. He had earned that. Orrin looked at the hills. "That man Pinley," he said. "He offered Willa everything on paper, money, security, Denver society. Do you know what she told me?" Silas shook his head. "She said, 'He does not listen, Papa. He waits for his turn to speak.'" Orrin turned to look at Silas directly. "And I knew then who she had chosen. I was just waiting for you to show up." He settled back in his chair. "Supper is at 6 most evenings," he said. "Nell sets a good table." October arrived cold and clear and golden. The courtship moved at the pace of two people who were also running properties, which meant it happened in the spaces between work. Supper at the Ashford table 3 evenings a week. Sunday afternoons walking the property lines together. Silas brought wildflowers from the north pasture, not bought, just ones he noticed and thought she would like. Willa pressed them without making a production of it. She taught him to make her mother's apple pie. He was not good at it. She was patient in a way that surprised him because patience was not her natural gift. She told him so directly. She said he made it easy, which was the kind of thing she said sideways without looking at him, that he found himself thinking about for days afterward. He fixed the sticking gate on the Ashford property without mentioning it. Orrin acknowledged it 2 weeks later, with a handshake that communicated more than a speech could have. One Sunday afternoon, Willa took him to see the old Ashford orchard behind the south field. It had been her grandfather's project, 6 apple trees planted 40 years ago that still produced every autumn, despite nobody tending them properly since the old man died. The trees were gnarled and leaning and beautiful in the way that things become when they have survived long enough to stop caring about appearances. Willa stood beneath the largest one and looked up through the branches at the October sky. "My grandfather planted these the year he married my grandmother," she said, "one for each year they had been courting." She was quiet for a moment. 6 years, he waited 6 years. Silas looked at her. "That is a long time." She met his eyes. "Some things are worth the wait. You just have to be sure the person you are waiting for is actually going to show up." He heard what she was really saying. He heard the question inside it. And he answered it not with words, but by reaching out and taking her hand, there under the apple trees in the golden afternoon, and holding it the way she would later hold his in the kitchen with the east window, like something worth keeping. And then one night in mid-October, something happened that he never told her about. He was walking across the field toward the Ashford house for supper. The lights were on in the kitchen. He could see movement through the window. Willa setting the table, Nell at the stove. The ordinary choreography of a household preparing to welcome someone. And he stopped, not because anything was wrong, because something was right, and that frightened him in a way that nothing wrong ever could. He stood in the dark field with the warmth ahead of him and understood what he was walking toward. Not just supper, not just Willa, but the full weight of caring about something enough that losing it would break him. He had been here before, in a different way, standing beside his mother's bed, standing at his father's grave. He knew what it cost to hold something that could be taken. He stood there for 10 minutes in the cold dark. He listened to the wind, and then he walked forward. Not because the fear was gone, but because what was ahead of him was worth more than what the fear was trying to protect. Willa opened the door before he knocked. She always heard him coming across the field. "You are late," she said. "The biscuits are getting cold." He stepped inside into the warmth and the smell of supper and the sound of Nell humming at the stove and looked at Willa across the kitchen and thought, this is what I almost did not let myself have. That night at the table, after Nell had gone to sit with Orrin in the other room, Willa said something that stopped him. She said she found it easier to talk to him than to anyone she had known for years, and she could not explain why. "Why do you think that is?" he asked. "I think you actually listen," she said. "Most people are waiting for their turn to speak." He looked at her across the table in the lamplight. "I am learning that from you," he said. She smiled, that small, direct smile that had no performance in it. "Good," she said. "You are a fast learner when you try." He asked her in November at the fence by the creek. He had considered a more elaborate setting, the ridge above the valley, the view from the north pasture where you could see 3 counties on a clear day. But when the moment came, it did not feel right to dress it up. The creek was where they had said the true things. It seemed right to return. The air had the first real cold of winter. Willa had a shawl around her shoulders. The trees along the creek had let go of most of their leaves, and the ones that remained were deep gold against the pale sky. He had his mother's ring in his pocket, a simple silver band with a small stone. He had been carrying it for 3 weeks, waiting for the right moment, and had finally understood that the right moment was the one you chose to make. "Willa," he said. She turned to him. "I know it took me longer than it should have to see what was right in front of me, but I see it now. I see you clearly every day, and I want to keep seeing you every day for the rest of my life. I want to build something with you, a home, a life we make together. I would very much like it if you would marry me." She looked at him for a long moment. Her eyes were bright in the November light. She was smiling, and it was the kind of smile that is so genuine it has nowhere to hide. "Silas Thorn," she said, "it took you long enough. Is that a yes?" "That is absolutely a yes." He put his mother's ring on her finger there beside the creek. She looked at it for a moment with an expression that was not about the ring, but about the life it represented. Then she looked up at him, and he kissed her for the first time, and the water moved past them the way it always had, faithful and constant, and a few last leaves let go into the cold air above them. That night, alone in the ranch house, Silas opened the old wooden box where the ring had been kept. He was putting it away on the shelf when he noticed something he had never seen before. The box had a false bottom. A thin panel of wood fitted so precisely that it was invisible unless you knew to look for it. He pried it open carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded small, covered in handwriting he recognized instantly. His mother's hand, neat and deliberate, the writing of a woman who chose her words the way she chose everything, with care and intention. The letter was short. It was dated the year she died. "Silas, if you are reading this, then you have found someone to give this ring to. I want you to know something. I met Nell Ashford at the church fair when her little girl was 5 years old. That child walked up to a stranger's table, poured water for everyone without being asked, and went back to her mother without saying a word. I turned to your father and said, that is the kind of woman our boy will need. Someone who does the right thing when no one is watching. I do not know if it will be her, but I know it will be someone like her, someone who faces east." Silas read the letter twice. Then he sat in the kitchen for a very long time, holding a piece of paper that weighed almost nothing and meant almost everything. His mother had been gone 6 years. She had never met Willa, not really, not as the woman her son would love, but she had seen a 5-year-old pour water for strangers, and she had understood something about the world that Silas had taken 30 years and a burned letter and a fence by a creek to figure out. The inheritance was never the ring. It was the knowing, the quiet certainty of a mother who understood her son better than he understood himself, even from beyond the place where letters can be sent. That winter, Silas rebuilt the kitchen. He replaced the floor in the main room, and he cut a new window into the east wall so the morning light would come through clean and warm and golden. He did not tell Willa. He did not tell anyone. He just did it, alone in the cold months, because the house was hers now, even if she did not live in it yet, and he wanted her to walk in for the first time and know without being told that someone had thought of her in the dark of winter. In February, Willa came with Nell to plan where things would go. She walked into the kitchen and saw the new window and the morning light pouring through it and went very still. "You did this without telling me," she said. "I did. Why the east window?" "So you would have good light in the mornings," he said. She was quiet. Then she walked across the kitchen floor and took his hand and held it the way you hold something you intend to keep forever. 3 words, no performance, just thank you. And he understood that she was not thanking him for the window. She was thanking him for what the window meant, that he had thought of her before she was there and made something ready for her arrival. That is what love looks like when it does not announce itself. It just quietly faces east. The wedding was on a Saturday in April. The hills were green. The sky was the bright wash blue that follows a week of spring rain. Half of Millhaven came. Willa wore a dress Nell had made from ivory cotton with small embroidered details at the collar. It was not elaborate. It was not trying to be anything other than what it was. She walked to him with her father on one arm, her face clear and certain, and Silas thought he could not believe he had been slow about this. They said their vows in front of Reverend Lyle, who kept it short because everyone agreed he was better at weddings when he did. Orrin Ashford's voice cracked slightly when asked who gives this woman, which caused a sympathetic ripple through several rows. Silas said his vows looking directly at Willa. They were for her, not for the room. She said hers the same way. Then they were married. Old Nesbit played the fiddle. Everyone ate and danced on the grass until the sun went down. Old Gentry had come to the wedding, despite his back, walking with a hickory cane he had carved himself and refusing every offer of a chair for the first hour out of pure stubbornness. He sat in the front row during the ceremony with the rigid posture of a man who will not let his body embarrass him in public. When the vows were done and the crowd moved toward the food tables, Silas walked past him. Gentry reached out and caught his arm. Silas looked down at the old man. "So you finally stopped being a fool," Gentry said. His voice was rough, but his eyes were not. Silas smiled. "I had some help." Gentry made that sound of his, the one that could mean anything, and released his arm. Then he said, more quietly, "Your mother would have liked this. She would have liked her very much." Silas had not expected that. He stood there for a moment, unable to speak, because Gentry had known Frances Thorn, had been her neighbor for 15 years, and there are things that only the people who knew the dead can give to the living. Confirmation, witness, the assurance that the person you lost would have approved of the person you became. "I think so too," Silas said, and he meant it more than Gentry would ever know, because of a letter in a ring box that he had not told anyone about yet. During the dancing, Roscoe Dunlap stood apart near the fence line with a cup in his hand, watching. Holt McGuire walked over and stood beside him. "You all right, Roscoe?" Roscoe did not answer immediately. He watched Silas lead Willa across the grass in something that was not quite a waltz, but was close enough for Millhaven. Silas was smiling in a way that Roscoe had never seen on him, a full, unguarded smile with nothing held back and nothing protected. "Dust," Roscoe said, "wind this time of year." But he turned his face away, and anyone who looked closely would have seen his shoulders shake once, briefly. He had worked the Thorn Ranch for nearly 20 years. He had watched a boy become a man and watched that man wall himself off from everything soft and vulnerable and human. And now he was watching that same man dance with a woman who had somehow gotten past every wall without breaking a single one of them. There are things old men see that do not need words. This was one of them. That night, in the ranch house with the east window and the new floor, Willa sat at the kitchen table with her hair down and her hands wrapped around a cup of tea. She looked at Silas across the table with an expression that was entirely new. Something settled, something permanent, something that looked like the beginning of a very long story. "We are going to be very happy here," she said. "You know that, I know," he said. "I think I have known for a while." "She's slower than I was." "But I got there," he said. "You got there." The year that followed was built from ordinary days and honest work. The ranch grew steadily. Silas expanded the north pasture. Willa took over the accounts because she was better with numbers, and they both knew it. She also organized a lending system among the women of Millhaven for tools and supplies during hard seasons. A practical idea that she had without realizing it was also a quiet act of community leadership that people would remember for years. On a Tuesday in the autumn of their first year together, Silas was at the fence by the creek, the same section repaired again after another spring flood, because that is the nature of things that matter. They require constant maintenance. They do not stay fixed. You build them and you rebuild them, and you show up every season to do the work again, not because it is easy, but because it is yours. Willa came down the path from the house. She raised a hand. He climbed the fence and went to her. They sat together at the edge of the creek in the late afternoon light. Willa leaned her head against his shoulder. "You know what I have been thinking about," she said. "What?" "That first summer, the creek. What you said. Whoever marries you will be lucky." "I was right," he said. "You were. He is very lucky. I am the lucky one." She lifted her head and looked at him with that direct gaze, the one that saw through everything and settled for nothing less than the truth. "We are both lucky," she said, "and that is enough." The mountains held the last of the sun on their high ridges. The water moved past them with its constant, faithful sound. Millhaven County kept on being Millhaven County, beautiful and indifferent, full of people trying to build lives worth the building. And Silas Thorn sat beside the woman who had waited for him with a patience he did not deserve and a courage he was still learning from. And he understood, with the full weight of a man who knows what things cost and what they are worth, exactly what he had almost missed. He was grateful for it, down to the bone. The kind of grateful that does not fade with time but deepens with it, the way tree roots deepen slowly, season by season, until they hold the ground together so completely that nothing can pull them out. He had gotten there, slower than he should have been, but there, exactly where he was supposed to be. Silas Thorn was not a coward. He was just a man who had gotten so used to not wanting things that he stopped noticing when he had started wanting them again. That is not a weakness unique to him. That is something most of us recognize in ourselves if we are honest about it, and Willa knew for years. She carried it quietly, without bitterness, without performing it for anyone. And when the moment came, she answered honestly when she could have deflected. That took more courage than anything Silas ever did at that fence. They both chose the honest thing. And from that one moment at a creek in Colorado in the summer of 1882, everything else followed. The greatest things in this life are rarely hidden. They are usually right there, close by, doing laundry by a creek, waiting for you to look up from whatever you have been doing and finally see them clearly. Do not wait 7 years.